Language was never possible. We never spoke in one voice. This line captures just a fraction of the novel's daring ideas about how we speak and how we think. I'm talking about the book that Ursula K. Le Guin once called a fully achieved work of art, Embassytown by China Mieville. Let's get this book undone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 3 of Books Undone. I'm your host, Livia J. Elliot, and today I'll be discussing Embassytown by China Mieville. To me, this was an exceptional read focused on language and communication and with an underlying socio-political commentary. It is both a meditation on language and an act of linguistic imagination itself, a novel that demonstrates what words can build and what they can destroy. This episode focuses on two central threads in Embassytown: language and the ways it shapes and is shaped by society. Before we dive in, allow me a few quick notes. Spoilers ahead. I will be discussing major elements of Embassytown, so I won't spoil other Miéville novels. This is one interpretation. What follows is my reading on the book's themes. Miéville may have meant something entirely different, and you might see it differently too, which is, of course, part of the fun. Now, let us cover some trivia about the author and the book. After that, I will introduce the setting, present my hypothesis, and follow through with the analysis. China Mieville is a British speculative fiction writer and also a literary critic. He holds the record for the most Arthur C. Clarke Award wins, 3, and has additionally won the British Fantasy Award, Hugo Award, Locus Award, and World Fantasy Awards. He was also nominated to the Nebula Awards, Bram Stoker's, and Philip K. Dick Award Special Citation, the Kitsch's Award, among others. In 2015, he became Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Curiously, he didn't start as a writer. In 1994, he graduated as a BA in social anthropology from Clare College, Cambridge, and went to pursue postgraduate education. In 2001, he gained both a master's degree and PhD in international law from the London School of Economics, continuing with a Frank Knox Fellowship at Harvard University. He first published a non-fiction work based on his own PhD thesis, and then moved to writing fiction. Yet his fiction has never deviated too far away from political commentary. In an interview with Long Sunday, 2009, Mieville stated that I grew up reading genre, and so I have become really interested in it at a theoretical level. At a gut basis, I'm interested in genre because that's what was formative for me as a reader. I think that what tends to interest me is the unexamined political assumptions of genre, or to be fair, I should say usually unexamined, because there is plenty of self conscious revisionist genre out there. During interviews, Mieville has listed M. John Harrison, Michael Moorcock, Gene Wolfe, and Ursula K. Le Guin as his influences. He's also made references to Russian writers Arkady and Boris Strugatsky and Andrei Platonov. He is an incredibly prolific writer, publishing novels, novellas, short story collections, comic books, and even one co-written children's picture book. Today, we are discussing Embassytown, published in 2011. It is a standalone novel oriented towards sci-fi and including Mieville's own brand new weirdness. It won both the Locus Award and the Premio Ignotus, and was also nominated to the following awards: Arthur C. Clarke, BSFA, Hugo, John W. Campbell Memorial, the Kitsch's Red Tentacle, the Sewing, and the Nebula. This book is about language, and so the author relies on fictional language as a way of building the world. These neologisms often hide references to books or authors that may have influenced him. Quite interesting, Ursula K. Le Guin, one of the author's own inspirations, reviewed Embassy Town for The Guardian and wrote the following. When everything in a story is imaginary and much is unfamiliar, there is far too much to explain and describe. So, one of the virtuosities of SF is the invention of box words that the reader must open to discover a trove of meaning and implication. Mieville sets the bar rather high, but most of his neologisms come clear with a nice shock of revelation. Let us begin by presenting the setting. The story is a framed narrative told by a human woman named Avice Bena Cho. She was born in the city of Embassytown, the main human settlement on the planet Arieka, which sits at the far edge of known and traveled space. Also, Avice is important to the plot. The setting itself demands just as much attention. Embassy Town, the city, is, and at the same time is not, an independent settlement. It sits on the periphery of the indigenous main city and is enclosed within a vast engineered atmosphere bubble known as a Yoli breath. Within it, humans can breathe normally and without aid. Throughout the book, the indigenous, the planet's native species, are referred to in two ways. Hosts is a respectful name embassy towners use. Everywhere else, they are simply called Arieke or Ariekene. The hosts are not humanoid, and several aspects of their physiology shaped the development of their native tongue. In particular, they have a limb called fan wing, which serves as their hearing organ. Their other limb, the gift wing, is used for grasping objects. They also have two mouths. Each mouth has its own shape and produces a distinct class of sounds. As a result, when hosts speak their native tongue, called language capitalized, they produce two simultaneous vocal lines, cut from the upper mouth and turn from the lower. Language has no written form, but humans represent it using a fractional notation with cat as a numerator and turn as a denominator. Say this. Yet this perfectly synchronized duet of voices is more than sound. It is thought made worse. But what does this mean? Thought made worse. Early on the book, Avice recounts one anecdote of humanity's first landing in Arieka. That story within the story will lead us to understanding why I described language as thought made worse. As Avice tells us, that first mission into Arieka sent a crew called ACL, which stands for Accelerated Contact Linguistics. These people are defined as a specialty crossbred from pedagogics, receptivity, programming, and cryptography. It was used by the scholar explorers of Bremen's pioneer ships to effect very fast communication with indigenous they encountered or which encountered them. Thus, when the ACL arrived to Arica and encountered the hosts, they put their machines to use. Quickly, they translated language, that mix of cut and turn sounds, into Anglo-Ubic, the universal human tongue of the setting evolved from English. I will read the excerpt about what happened. Within a few thousand hours, Terra linguistics could understand much of what the hosts said and synthesize responses and questions in the one Ariekene language. The phonetic structure of the sentences they had their machines speak, the tonal shifts, the vowels, and the rhythm of consonants were precise, accurate to the very limits of testings. The hosts listened and did not understand a single sound. Strange, isn't it? If you hear me say dog, you will immediately think of a canine, regardless of its breed, age, looks, or character. So, why, assuming the sounds were correct, did the host not understand? That answer is a fundamental premise of the book, so allow me to pause here and share some relevant linguistic concepts. At the basics, every word in a language is a combination of sounds, speech, translated into notation, written word, or hand signals. The famous linguist Ferdinand de Saussure defined these elements as signifiers. For example, imagine a post it note with the letters T, E, A written on it. Those three letters are the signifier. Each signifier is attached to a signified, a concept or mental idea evoked by it. For example, if after I describe the post it, you imagined the idea of tea, the drink, its flavor, or even the act of drinking it, that mental image is the signified. That sum of signifier and signified yields a sign, something that conveys meaning. This is related to what linguists call semantics. As Gudivada et al. Explains, there are two types of semantics. Lexical semantics, which deals with the concepts attached to individual words and expressions, and compositional semantics, which studies how the lexical ones combine to form phrases and sentences. Together, they allow us to communicate meaning to others, and they are also a source of miscommunication. For example, if when I say T, you instead hear TEE, you may have thought of a t shirt, which reflects something de Saussure argued that the link between signifier and signified also depends on the differences between signifiers. However, this type of miscommunication does not seem to have happened to the ACLers. Avice's anecdote said that the machine's pronunciation was exact and the words correct. So, if we take that at face value, what else could have failed? The answer is a problem we humans don't have. For the hosts, how they hear the words matters as much as what they hear, namely the so called correctness of the signifier. Truth be told, we humans seldom worry about how we hear the words. Whether you hear me say tea in person through this recording or whether you read it in the script, it doesn't matter. You can still connect the signifier to the signified and grasp the lexical semantics. This, however, was not true for the hosts. The ACLers failed in their communication attempts because the machines producing sounds were the wrong quote unquote how. They didn't realize this until two researchers, and perhaps due to coincidence, shouted almost in unison,
Jar.
Suhail, a key language greeting. Do you know what happened? Avice plays a recording from one of the researchers who explains, Juan Ariekes turned to us. It spoke. We didn't need or where to make sense of what it said. It asked us who we were. It asked what we were and what we had said. This time, even though our shouts were much less accurate than any were renditions, it knew that we had tried to speak. What was happening here is a reflection of how language works for the hosts, of the impact of that how in the relationship between signifier and signified. To them, hearing a correct signifier is not enough. The sounds must be spoken thoughtfully and with intention, and the speaker must genuinely believe each word and avoid any internal contradictions. Without that, the correct sound, the signifiers, are not a signified but merely noise to the hosts. Avice reasons this as follows. Where to us each word means something, to the hosts each word is an opening, a door through which the thought of that referent, the thought itself that reach for that word, can be seen. Her explanation is intuitive, philosophical even. In turn, let us hear Syle's explanation. He is Avice's off-worlder husband and a linguist by profession. When talking to her, he uses the same theory I introduced to explain language. Does it ever occur to you that language is impossible, Avice? He said. It makes no sense. They don't have polysemy. Words don't signify. They are the reference. Sile adds two new concepts to our linguistic foundations. Polysemy is a linguistic phenomenon where a single word has multiple related meanings. For example, bank can be the side of a river, the financial institution, or even a bench. When communicating, we infer its correct meaning due to the sentence's context. Referents are the third pillar proposed by Ferdinand de Saussure, not part of the sign itself, but the actual object or thing in the real world the sign points to. If we return to my example with the tea, this will be the precise cup I left on my desk that's now gone cold. Sile is basically arguing that every word in language, every signifier, has a unique and very well defined signified that corresponds absolutely to the same referent. Let me put it up this way. For us humans, every word is a triangle where one side is a signifier, another is a signified, and the last one is a referent. The total of these three elements composes a sign. For hosts, every word in language is a line. One end is a signifier, the sound symbol, and the other the referent, and that's it. There is a scene in the book in which Avice is trying to understand this. So, how will I distinguish that glass and that one and that one? I tallied them with my finger. You said the glass in front of the apple, and the glass with a flaw in its base, and the glass with a residue of wine left in it. In other words, language forces hosts to skip the mental image and just refer to the actual thing in the world. This is what Seil meant when he said that two hosts' words are the reference. Language does not allow for abstract thought. This tight correspondence between words, signs, truth, its reference, and thought, the intention behind it, is what I teased you before when saying that language is thought made words. Looking at it critically, this fact of language that Mieville created could also be pointing to yet another linguistic theory. But hold on to this point. I will come back to it later. For now, let us stay with this the host's literalization, where each word in language connects to the stock that originated it and that to a truthful referent, forces readers to confront how we experience and leverage language. From here on, the psychological consequences of this fused language thought model will become a lens through which the book explores truth, deception, and the reshaping of the self. To begin unraveling these themes, let me finish the story of the researchers, Yurik and Becca, because the hosts understood them after they shouted together. And since these linguists had no way to infer the link between words and thoughts, they guessed the problem lay with the machines. That perhaps if two people spoke at the same time, one as cat and the other as turn, then the host will recognize who was speaking, making communication possible. Spoiler alert, it did not work. Let me return to Avice's narration of the event. Of course, Yurik and Becker tried again, they and their colleagues practicing duets, words that meant hello or we would like to speak. We watched the recorded ghosts. We listened to them learn their lines. Sounds flawless to me, said Sile, my husband, and even I recognized the phrases, but the Area K did not. You and B had no shared mind, Sile said. No coherent thoughts behind each word. What a conundrum, isn't it? A machine didn't work because although the sounds were correct, they had no thoughts behind them. Likewise, duets, two people speaking in tandem, didn't work either because their thoughts were not perfectly aligned. Do you know what happened? Humanity, being humanity, it promptly forgot its own ethics and started experimenting on humans to find the perfect candidates to speak language in duets. First, they tried twins, but that didn't quite work. Their sounds may have been flawless, but the hosts didn't hear them. Next came identical twins, trained from babyhood to behave as one person, which, unsurprisingly, turned out to be prohibitively expensive given its low success rate. So, naturally, they moved on to cloning, creating what the book calls ambassadors. Here is where Mieville sneaks in a discussion on identity, individuality, and communication. Ambassadors were two so called clone siblings created just for the purpose of communicating with hosts in language. Each pair was crafted by Embassytown's staff and reared since childhood for their future position as ambassadors. Since their earliest moments, each pair was forced to wear a cochlear link that allowed their thoughts to filter from one to another. Every day, they had to sit on a machine that equalized them, erasing any unique marks each individual may have developed so they remained exact copies. If something couldn't be erased, it was replicated in the other. Furthermore, ambassadors had composed names, namely, each quote unquote half was tagged with a single syllable, and the full name only formed from both together. as if alone they were nothing and only together they could be a person. Thus, in Anglo-Ubic, their names were read with a pause in the middle, Henry, Magda, or Calvin. In language, it was presented as a fractional notation,
Hen,
Hen, Mag,
Da,
or
Cal.
Vin. But things get even more complicated. The embassy towners don't really see ambassadors as two separate people. Consider this exchange between Avice and her husband Sile, the off-worlder linguist. They are not twins, love, I said. Whatever, you're right, clones, doppels. The K thinks they are hearing one mind, but they are not. I raised one eyebrow and he said, You have to wonder, don't you? What is that they do, stuff I mean, to make two people think they are one? Yeah, but they are not two, I said. That's the point about ambassadors. But they could have been, should have been. So what did staff do? Let's pause here for a moment because there are a few threads here. This conversation reveals a crucial tension we will need for this analysis. From Avice's perspective, which we must assume reflects most Embassytowners, the two clones or doppels forming an ambassador are a single person. But Sile, the off-worlder, insists they are distinct individuals, twins, in a sense that carries weight, to separate beings who merely look alike. This subtle but profound misunderstanding is key to everything that follows because within Embassy Town society, there is one taboo question, something called the Tallying Mystery. Avies reflects on it as follows. This was a question that we call the Tallying Mystery. Did the host consider each ambassador one mind, double bodied people? And if so, did they think the rest of us have things, irrelevances, machines, a city full of the ambassador's marionettes? It's an uncomfortable question, isn't it? On one level, Avice is suggesting that a human's inability to speak language may make us non sentient in the eyes of the hosts. At another level, the Tallinn Mystery argued that Embassy Town's staff had successfully erased the Doppel's individual identity to create a double bodied mind. There is so much to unpack here and not enough time or space to cover it all. So let us return to the linguistics by asking two more questions. Could ambassadors really speak language? Were their minds so perfectly tuned? Sile, ever the skeptic and insisting on the ambassador's individuality, doubles down. And ambassadors are twins, not single people. There is not one mind behind language when they speak it. It is like we can only talk to hosts because of a mutual misunderstanding. Sile seems determined to scandalize his wife, so why don't you let me scandalize you a bit? What if I told you that Avice was part of language, that she was enlanguaged? It is a tricky question, so let me begin with a real world example. If I tell you the staff were Machiavellian, you will probably assume the staff members of Embassy Town were cunning, scheming, or unscrupulous. Why? Because Niccolo Machiavelli's work, The Prince, popularized a very specific attitude and usage of power. And now his name has become a shorthand for everything his book implied. Namely, his last name, Machiavelli, is now a signifier attached to the thesis of his book, The Signified. What happened to Avice is somewhat similar. She became part of a host's language and was quote unquote spoken, just as in the example above. Except she is not one word, as in Machiavelli's case, but a whole sentence. This sentence describes something she did. But before I tell you her language meaning, we need to answer one nagging question. Why would Avice be unlanguaged? She thought of it in this way. For hosts, speech was sucked. It was as nonsensical to them that a speaker could say, could claim something it knew to be untrue as to me, that I could believe something I knew to be untrue. Without language for things that didn't exist, hosts could hardly think of them. As Sile said, if in language words are the referent, then hosts need very specific words, or they cannot say, or even worse, think of that referent. Remember when I mentioned that Mieville might have been speculating about linguistic theories? This is why. The limitation of language could be based on a now debunked idea, the strong Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, also known as linguistic determinism. It posits that the semantic structure of a particular language determines the structure of mental categories among its speakers. In its strongest forms, it implies that if a language lacks a conceptual category, such as one corresponding to love, its speakers may find it difficult or even impossible to think about that concept. In addition, every natural language, namely every tongue that evolves organically within a community, is ever expanding. If you think of it, modern words like internet or Googling or laptop did not exist a century ago. Society developed them because speaking without them was becoming cumbersome. Before them, we needed sentences to approximate meaning. To us humans, newly added words simplify communication. To hosts, based on the strong Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, those new words make communication and thought possible. So, in real life, languages evolve in unexpected ways, with words being proposed on the go and becoming widely adopted by the public before they are accepted by dictionaries. Hosts did so differently. They were aware of language's limitation, identified a gap, and did something to create a word or sentence so they could speak of its referent. When Avice was enlanguaged as a child, she was then turned into a simile, a figure of speech comparing two unlike things by using like or as. It all began when some school teachers and ambassadors approached her with a request to help the host create a new word. The book implies that this practice is known to Embassytowners and regarded as an honor. The teachers argued that first the host had decided on the actions they needed performed and requested ambassadors for a human girl. Then, a former one had recommended Avice. She agreed to be enlanguaged, and days later performed the actions that would create the simile. About the experience itself, she reflects, what occurred in that crumbling once dining room wasn't by any means the worst thing I have ever suffered, or the most painful, or the most disgusting. It was quite bearable. It was, however, the least comprehensible event that had or has ever happened to me. What that means is that Avice had to go somewhere and perform a specific act in order to create a truthful reference that could be spoken. After that, she was brought before the ambassadors and her school teachers. The ambassadors spoke to me in the language of our hosts. They spoke me. They said me. There was a human girl who in pain ate what was given her in an old room built for eating, in which eating had not happened for a while. They warned me that the literal translation of the simile would be inadequate and misleading. It will be shortened with use, Brent told me. Soon they will be saying you are a girl ate what was given her. Having Avice and language allowed the host to speak her, namely, to use her simile in normal speech to make a comparison and eventually resolve the book's main plot. But we cannot discuss that now. We need to understand a few more loose points before we tie them up. In particular, how the usage of Avice's simile evolved. Years after her enlanguagement, she returned to Embassytown, and Ambassador Calvin introduced her to a host like so. The host spoke rapidly, crane their eye corals. I do not know, one host said to Calvin about me. How I did without her, how I thought what I needed to think. That's a key problem of linguistic determinism. Your language limits your thoughts. Yet someone could still argue, well, we use similes all the time. We don't know for sure they exist. For example, I could write, the dawn was red like blood pouring from a wound, without having an actual open wound. Why couldn't the host do this? Remember Seil's theory, and that one fact we introduced before. Hosts cannot speak in hypothetics because they can't abstract themselves. Hosts cannot lie. And humanity, being humanity, deemed this clearly unacceptable. We know ourselves. When faced with another culture, our instinctive reaction is somewhere between confusion and immediate violence. Just check our first contact films, where the steps are usually attack, destroy, and interview the corpses for details. Embassy Town didn't go quite that far, but the staff and ambassadors still couldn't accept a society incapable of lying. Their solution? Why, to generously bestow upon the host the gift of deception. Psychologically speaking, lying is not that simple. As Mares and Torvis 2018 explain, lies generally manifest as complete deception, half truth, exaggerations, and pertinent omissions. Lies are told from one of two reasons. Either the deceptive person believes they have more to gain, or is incapable of discerning what the truth is, either temporarily or owing to some permanent mental defect. That means we can lie unwillingly, but also knowingly and to avoid embarrassment, manage expectations, or even omit uncomfortable information. In some cases, lying may not be malicious. For example, pro social lies are intended to benefit others because they are told in situations in which honesty will cause heightened emotional harm. Now, linguistically speaking, lying is also complex. For example, researcher Erin Bryan determined three main types of lies: real, white, and gray. Unsurprisingly, she discovered that the use of white lies is so widespread they are often viewed as a form of communication competency that is necessary to successfully negotiate social interactions. Curiously, philosophers and linguists seem to consider irony and metaphor also as a type of deception because their linguistic violations result in covert untruthfulness. All of this is to point that so-called gift the ambassadors try to bestow on the host will undoubtedly have long-lasting, unpredictable consequences. We could argue this is the most central plot point in the book. It all begins with the Festival of Lies. It happened on the host city, and ambassadors and staff traveled there wearing breathing masks. The host will present an object, say a blue box, and one by one the ambassadors will step in to lie about that object before them. This is what happened on Avice's first festival. The host spoke. It says, describe it, Sile whispered. Miéville answered, May in the cat, Bell in the turn voice. The Ariake stepped up and down, a sudden unanimity, a tense excitement. They tottered and chattered. What did they say? I said. Miéville? What did they? Sile looked as if in disbelief at me. They are saying, it's red. Then, during Ambassador's Leroy's turn, this happened. Leroy spoke again, and several Ariake shouted out of control. Leroy says the box is a bird and it's flying away, Sile said into my helmet. I swear I saw hosts crane their eyes corals up as if the lifeless box may have taken off. I know. From our perspective, the host's reactions, shocked, stunned, looking up to actually corroborate if the box was a bird and flying away, they all seem foolish, implausible, or exaggerated. However, you must remember that hosts were literally witnessing the impossible. They could not lie. If the word's referent did not exist, they could not speak it, and they had to do so with absolute certainty backed by ultimate precision. Instead, these ambassadors, these double bodied people, said an untruth while actually believing on it. They had the referent before them and still lied without hesitation, without second guessing. Imagine the cultural shock. Imagine the mental strain after being limited your whole life. Yet the Festival of Lies didn't end there, for some courageous host took to the stage to try to lie. This was physically straining, and Avice relates that some double whinnied and some made noises that were only noises, clicks and whistles of failure, no words at all. Yet there were some successes. When the object was yellow, the host, trying to lie, shuddered and retracted several of its eyes, gathered itself, and in its two voices said, Yellow, beige. It was hardly a dramatic untruth, but the crowd were rapturous about it. After these events, lying or trying to lie became something like a sport. There were groups that would try to do so in different ways, finding strategies to bend their minds and thus language until they could utter a lie. Two virtuoso liars appeared, Tesh
Sul,
Escher and another one Avice referred to as
Danza.
Spanish due to the markings on its fan wing. What was happening here is just a consequence of the complexity of lying. You see, lying is so fundamental to us humans that researcher Daniel Dorr argued that without the lie, language will not be as complex as it is. Linguistic communication will be much simpler, and the cognitive requirement of language will not be so heavy. He argues that our natural languages evolved the ability to lie, namely, to communicate beyond the here and now, to express non facts, abstractions, counterfactuals, and imagined states. Not long ago, I also mentioned that irony and metaphor could be lies, and some researchers have determined that in certain pragmatic contexts, metaphor can function like a lie because it involves saying this is that rather than this is what it is. Think of it this way. When you imagine a future promotion or write a story like Lord of the Rings set in a secondary fictional world, you are not lying in a malicious or deceitful way, but producing non actual representations using the same cognitive machinery that also makes deception possible. For the hosts in Embassytown, this is revolutionary because language forces them to only speak factual truth and has thus denied them this ability. Yet even then, did hosts really needed to learn how to lie? Excellent question. Mieville insisted on not answering it, so I won't either. Instead, I will do what he did in the book and tell you a bit more about what happened after. A new ambassador was appointed, and they were not a doppel pair. In fact, these two men, known as
Ra.
S, were two random off-worlders selected by Arieka's parent nation, Bremen. I won't discuss the politics of why Bremenian did this here, since I could write an entire episode just for that. Suffice to say, EzRa were quaint, not identical twins and neither clones, just two people who wore the cochlear implant and had passed an empathy test, the only known measure to somewhat estimate whether hosts will hear them. Thus, Embassytown's staff organized a welcome party for EzRa and invited a handful of hosts. At a given moment, they set EzRa to introduce themselves. Avice was there to tell us what happened. EzRa spoke well, beautifully. I had heard enough of it to tell that. Their accent was good, their timing good, their voices were well suited. They said to the host that it was an honor to meet them. Shura Suhail,
Suhail.
they said. Good greetings. The hosts swayed as if they were at sea. One spammed its skift wing and its fan wing, the other kept them unnaturally still. One opened and closed its membrane several times in neurotic repetition. In very slow and unnerving unison, the Ariake emerged from their trance. Their eye corals drooped towards us and at last focused. They straightened and unstiffened their legs as if coming out of sleep. Clearly, something happened to the host, yet to understand that, we have to link three of the main concepts we have so far discussed: what ambassadors are, how language words are thoughts, the words are the reference, and the cognitive mechanisms enabling lying. As we mentioned before, ambassadors are manufactured twin minds kept in absolute synchrony through equalization. That neurological conditioning that erases divergences or reproduce them in the other. This perfect unity was essential because, as we discussed, the area K didn't perceive sounds, signifiers, but intent, the thoughts associated to an actual truth, the referent. It ensured that when speaking language to the host, each doppel, one cut, the other term, thought and felt precisely the same about the referent they spoke of. Yet EzRa introduced a subtle nuance, one likely linked to the cognition required to lie. You see, that empathy test was limited. Both S and Ra said good greetings, but to what extent can two independent people, two individuals, think of good greetings with the exact same enthusiasm and respect? To what extent can they think of the exact same signified, the abstract concept, when saying those words? Or even worse, what if these two individuals' thoughts were in opposition? What if S was bored and putting a nice face, while Ra was simply neutral? Of what if S was repulsed by the host and Ra intrigued by them? All my questions can be summarized into another. What if EzRa had a tiny cognitive dissonance while they spoke? We humans wouldn't notice it, but for the host, this encounter was catastrophic and intoxicating because it exposed a new semantic dimension. The world had been built on perfect correspondence between word and truth, and Ezra's speech broke that correspondence by demonstrating that one can say something that isn't entirely true and yet still be meaningful or even more meaningful. Ezra's fractured unity introduced contradiction into a species that equated language with truth. The host, who required perfect alignment between sound and intention, encountered for the first time a misalignment, a truth that was not quite so, because S and Ra felt somewhat differently. What happens after is a socio political debacle, and I will have to focus only on the linguistics of it to keep this episode at a sensible length. In short, the host stopped answering to regular ambassadors and left the meeting in their shocked state. During the following days, Embassytown's staff and ambassadors tried to reach the host's leader, but nobody replied until a cohort of Area K marched into Embassytown to demand, in front of a stunned population, to hear Ezra speak. The staff scrambled to comply and broke Ezra. Avice was on the street along the people. S came forward, then grudgingly Ra. They looked at each other with very different emotions, those two unlike men. They whispered. They spoke language together and broke the host to rapture. That scene is the moment in which Mieville literalizes a metaphor, living a lie, and to the host, it reshapes consciousness itself. It is another layer of the impossible made possible, and it turns them into addicts. What they are addicted to is the key question of the second half of the book, since staff, ambassadors, and even Avice and other similes assume hosts are just hung up to Ezra's voice, the sound, and the fact their voices are not precisely the same either. And it appended the Ariakane society. Hosts arrived en masse to Embassytown just to hear Ezra's speech, like junkies seeking their daily fix. Even their technology faltered because it was bioengineered, and their biological pieces also became addicted to Ezra's voice. As the days went by, the Ariakane needed a higher dosage, longer sentences, more frequent speeches because the trance lasted less and less. Relationships between both cities rapidly deteriorated, and Embassy Town's staff were forced to put up speakers in the host city so they could have their repeated fixes during the day. The Ariekane began to camp near these devices, waiting for their fix of cognitive dissonance. Desperate, some ambassadors ventured to the city to find some reasonable host and speak to them, but these efforts were futile. Then something happened. Some Ariake began to self mutilate, tearing their fan wings apart. Remember when I told you about their physical characteristics? Their fan wing was a limb that served as a hearing organ. Therefore, in human terms, these Ariakene were literally bursting their tympanic membranes. Yet again, humans being humans and self absorbed in their own political conundrums didn't think to understand the reasons behind this self mutilation. They only saw one thing: violence, and themselves as victims. The mutilated Ariake will attack the addicts and rip their fang wings before dragging them off. To make matter worse, they also attacked unsuspecting humans, patrols, farmers, civilians living in the periphery of Embassytown. The city began to shrink. Refugees filtered in until staff had to turn the embassy's central building into a communal living space. Meanwhile, in the host city, the addicts demanded longer, more frequent speeches, while the mutilated ravaged the farms to endeafen more Ariekene and build an army. An army that soon began marching towards Embassytown. But up to here, I did something intentionally mean. I only gave you the human perspective, the violence, the death, the destruction of Embassytown by a mob that seemed out of their minds, capable of self mutilation and of inflicting violence on their own kind when, until that moment, they had been absolutely peaceful. But there was more to it. Ezra's voice was a drug, and humans were its providers. If we assume that the Arieke failed to create noise cancelling devices, then the only quote unquote cure to their addiction was to be completely unable to hear Ezra's voice. Therefore, by ripping their fangwings, they were willingly becoming deaf in a desperate attempt to escape the junkie trap. By mutilating others, these the Fariekene were trying to cure their own in the only way that had worked so far. By attacking humans, they were trying to destroy the drug dealers upending Ariekene society and culture. It was a cry of resistance and self determination. If that shocked you, good. That's the intention of the book. So Miéville is far more subtle than I was. He left it to the reader to make the connection. I couldn't do that. So we need this understanding to finally round up our linguistic analysis. The point where semiotics, Avice's enLanguaged simile, the ambassador's identity, EzRa's cognitive dissonance, and the ability to lie and think abstractly finally link. It is the final arc in the book. The moment when some Ariekes learn to lie, although it is a bit more complex than that. While all the mayhem happened, some ex ambassadors found a group of liars from before, now led by the host Avice had referred to as a Spanish dancer. This group, five in total, were trying to fight against their addiction, suffering through deprivation to remain conscious. Avice, helped by others, drew the following hypothesis. Hosts were not addicted to Ezra's sound, but to the ambiguity it introduced as a consequence of their tiny cognitive dissonances. To them, Ezra's speech was the drug of contradiction. It wasn't about the voice itself, but the link between the signifiers, the referents, and how each half of that ambassador was able to think of minimally different mental concepts. Based on this, Avice and the others assumed that the only way to quote unquote cure the RK from Ezra's effect was to teach them abstract thought, which in turn required hosts to rapidly alter their language until it allowed the linguistic nuance that makes lying possible. The reason? As I told you before, lying isn't just deception. It is a broad spectrum and it relies on the same cognitive mechanisms. But how did Avice pull this off? Basically, she used herself, her own simile, like this. You are trying to change things, I said. Il-Sib repeated in language. You want change, like the girl who ate what was given her. So you are like me. Those who aren't trying to change anything are like a girl who didn't eat what she wanted, but what was given to her. They are like me. You are like the girl who ate. You are the girl who ate. You are like the girl. You are the girl. And so are the others who aren't like you. Did you catch what Avice was doing? She was bending Anglo-Ubic, or English, to its maximum extent to sneak in a lie. Let us walk that text line by line. If you recall, Avice's simile is the girl who, in the dark and in pain, ate what was given to her. The first sentence is, "You want change, like a girl who ate what was given her." There are a few nuances here to discuss. First, Avice is using her simile to replace the noun me. The reason? Because of the Tallying Mystery, she is not sure whether host perceived single-bodied humans as sentient. At the same time, she is using the simile as it is intended, to imply that a Spanish dancer ate what was given to it. This is not to be read literally, but as a simile. The mental concept behind this listened what was spoken to it, namely EzRa's drag voice. The next sentence is, "So you are like me." She introduces a noun to refer to herself. Now, read both sentences together. You want change like the girl who ate what was given her, so you are like me. We could translate it as, "You want change like me, so you are like me," by replacing the full simile for the noun. Now is where it gets linguistically spicy. The next sentence uses a simile as intended. Those who aren't trying to change anything are like the girl who didn't eat what she wanted, but what was given to her. They are like me. Let's break it down. The first half, those who aren't trying to change anything, refers to the addicts who are not trying to free themselves. Therefore, it excludes the mutilated ones. At the same time, those who aren't trying to change anything means those who are not a Spanish dancer. If you recall, the opening sentence is, "You, the Spanish dancer, are trying to change things. You want change." Next, those who aren't trying to change anything are like a girl who didn't eat what she wanted, but what was given to her. The abstraction, "eat what she wanted," cannot be taken literally. Avice is introducing a metaphor where eating what she wanted refers to listened what she understood, or spoke as she wanted and understood. Likewise, "but ate what was given to her" continues the eating metaphor. The hosts were forced to hear EzRa's voice and thus become addicts. The linguistic spies, they are like me. She's turning the tables here and using the noun me to refer to the simile. At this point, you have one level of contradiction. For different, nuanced reasons, both a Spanish dancer, who is trying to cure itself from the addiction, and the addicts, content to remain as they are both like a vis de simile. It is not a wordplay itself, but perhaps a meaning play. This is the power of metaphor, what researcher Marta Dinel referred to as linguistic violations that result in covert untruthfulness. She even added these violations can be explicit or implicit, what is said made as if to say, or what is implicated. Basically, to use a metaphor is a way of deception. The next two sentences are linked. You are like the girl who ate. You are the girl who ate. The first one is using herself as a simile, the second as a metaphor. But at the same time, the second sentence is an untruth. If we take this literally, we know that a Spanish dancer is not Avice. He is Avice's simile, but she is squeezing English to move past the literal and into the abstract. The first works within the host's existing system. It is a simile. The literal comparison they can understand because a simile, like Avice, has enacted an event. The second sentence, though, is complex if we read it at face value. We know the individual known as a Spanish dancer is not the human known as Avice. It is an untruth, but also a truth. A Spanish dancer is like the simile Avice represent. It is a new version of her simile. However, by using English in this way, Avice is pushing the Ariekes past the confines of simile and into the abstract space of metaphor, something language wasn't built to handle until this moment. The last three sentences reinforce the two key contradictions. You are like the girl, you are the girl, and so are the others who aren't like you. Yet after hours and hours of training, a Spanish dancer still shuddered and stuttered, unable to utter the lies. Until Avice remembered the Tallying Mystery. If you recall, the Tallying Mystery was that uncomfortable question relating ambassadors and single-bodied humans. Did hosts perceive ambassadors, the clone tuples artificially equalized, as one or two individuals? Furthermore, did that mean they perceived normal, single bodied humans as non sentient? Ambassador Ilceo tries to explain this to a Spanish dancer. I will not re-narrate the scene here, but when the host finally grasps what humans had done with ambassadors, the meaning of the metaphor finally sinks in. The reason? It is not explained in the book, but I have a theory. Solving the Tallying mystery allowed the Spanish dancer to understand me as a noun to refer to a vis, therefore enabling the distinction between a vis as a simile and a vis as an individual. You are like the girl who ate, you are the girl who ate. That linguistic difference revealed that meaning play Avice was trying to teach them. And the moment that happens is the moment the Spanish dancer and its crew are free from EzRa's drug voice. Avice plays a recording, and the freed host simply hear it, no longer shuddering like a dix. The reason? Understanding the nuance behind the metaphor and the abstraction needed to use it in contradictory ways allowed Arya K to perceive EzRa's cognitive dissonance and accept it as possible. By teaching them how to leverage metaphor, Avice changed Ariekane society. Let me read you the scene. The Ariake sifted the dot chips, listening with disbelief at how they heard what they heard. A Spanish dancer remained bent, but its eyes looked up to me. Yes, I said, yes. And a Spanish dancer could, and harmonizing with itself, said, yes. A Spanish dancer spoke English because it now had the cognitive mechanism allowing it to express non facts, abstractions, counterfactuals, and imagined states, therefore producing non actual representations by using the same cognitive machinery that also makes exception possible. I will summarize what happens after. Aviz, Il Cid, and a few more rush a Spanish dancer and its crew of liars towards the army of self-mutilated Ariekene. She plays recordings of the drug boys, and two non-mutilated Ariekene begin to shudder, as I always did, while the liars, a Spanish dancer, and others remain healthy. This showed the deaf that a non-violent cure to the drug was possible, effectively removing their need to attack humans. However, let me confess something. There is so much more to this. From here, the book goes on to explore some of the social political consequences of this change in society, how hosts handle the addicts that couldn't learn to lie, how the relationships with humans changed, how Embassytown itself changed, among many other things. I could write a whole episode about it, so let me know if you want to hear me talk about it. Reach out to me through my Substack at liviajelliot.substack.com. If there is interest, I will gladly make a second episode. However, let me close off with one more scene of the book. As time went by, a Spanish dancer learned that it could speak two different human tongues at the same time, one with each mouth. It could also say different words, not necessarily that, yes, it had first said. It is after a Spanish dancer has learned this that the following unfolds. When I asked the Spanish if it regretted learning to lie, it paused and said, I regret nothing. A performance, perhaps, but I envy that precision. I wonder if a Spanish dancer ever mourns itself. If it ever mourns itself. Because learning to use metaphor meant breaking through linguistic determinism to effectively change how Spanish thought. And because we are our thoughts for a Spanish dancer, that also meant changing who it was. What walked away wasn't the same mind that began that lesson, but whatever remained after metaphor rewrote it. But remember that this wasn't a willing transformation, far from it. The Spanish wanted a cure, and the only choices were self mutilation or reshaping its own mind so profoundly it could no longer be the being it had been. And it leaves us wondering, when language reshapes a mind so completely, is the one who remains a continuation or a replacement? Had EzRa not appeared, did humans really need to teach hosts how to lie? Was that change in Ariakan society evolution or corruption? Food for thought, most certainly. If you enjoy conversations like this, my own novel also explores alien intelligences and the redefinition of the self, so it does so from a different lens. You can find it linked below. Thanks for listening and happy reading.